welcome to colleagues that are on the call live, and also welcome to colleagues that are watching this back. We will get a recording out to everybody. It's been a little while since we've done a free webinar, but I suppose the purpose around this really was exactly what's on your screen. As soon as we saw the Ofsted report and review as a team, we just started having a discussion really about what this actually means on the ground on a day-to-day basis. So I think reports and reviews are, are great to give you an insight, but we just started unpicking it as a team. And hopefully all today is going to do, a little bit of a health warning. We've only got 45 minutes, but hopefully just give you a little bit of food for thought around your provision in your settings and what this report means to you. So Steve, if you just click on for me. So Beyond the Physical, if you don't know what Beyond the Physical are, we're a team of a group of professionals that believe in the power of physical education, school sport and physical activity to help transform young people's lives. So how we do that through events like this. We do that through our PE delivery team. We do that through accredited courses such as the one that's on the screen now, which is the PE Primary Specialism course, which is coming up in November. We do that through our innovative PE scheme of work as well. So, we're really being in this environment now as professionals, the people that are on this call for a long time now, hoping we can share some of our experience. But as with any walk of life, this is a completely an evolving piece all the time for all of us, isn't it? So hence why I'm sure a lot of you on this call is just to get that more information and delve into this topic a little bit more detail. As I've said earlier, yes, Steve, please, we'd love you to be involved in the draw. We're going to give you a £100 Amazon voucher away at the end of the call. The link is in the chat, so all you have to do is go on there, register for a free trial, and be on the call at the end. And Steve's got a little fancy wheel that is going to put everyone's name in, and we'll be able to give an Amazon voucher away at the end of the call. So please don't miss out on that opportunity. Without further ado, let's introduce our guests, and I'm absolutely delighted with the panel that we've got this afternoon. From left to right, first of all, Steve Wade is on the call, co-founder of Beyond the Physical, currently doing studying his doctorate in Mastery in Physical Education at Leeds Beckett University. So welcome to Steve. Steve is based in Leeds. And then we've got Ben Merry, who's in the Southwest, one of our colleagues at Beyond the Physical. He works 2 days with Beyond the Physical, and he also works 3 days at Bath Spa University as a senior lecturer. So welcome to Ben. Ben, thanks for joining us. Seth Foster is on the call. I've known Seth a number of years. Seth is vastly experienced representing the Pennine School Sports Partnership, who are one of the leading sports partnerships in the country. He also has led on mindfulness projects and disability sport. So hoping he can enrich the conversation, hoping he will enrich the conversation this afternoon with some of his insight. And last but not least, someone who's been on one of our webinars before, I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Julie Pearson, who has recently been working at St Mary's Twickenham as part of their ITT program there. Vastly experienced. If you didn't hear the webinar around the power of play, which we did a couple of years ago, please have a look at that because it's such a great webinar. So Julie, Ben, Steve and Seth, thank you for sharing your expertise. Fortunately, you won't hear from me for a little bit now. We'll hand over to the experts and then I'll jump back in towards the back end of the call. So yeah, Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time. Steve and I are going to take it in terms of the next kind of for four sections, really, where we're going to break down the different sections of the report that's just been released and just sort of share a few of our thoughts on it. And we will we'll invite opportunities towards the end when Paul comes back on, as he said, for discussion with Julie and Seth and Steve and I, and probably Paul will join as well, where we'll maybe have opportunities to break down each of these sections, maybe a little bit more detail, and you might want to pose a bit of a question around each one. So if you're scrolling away writing notes or anything like that, feel free to write something down about each section, and then we'll have time towards the end of the session, once we've gone through each of the more sort of pertinent points, to have a bit of a discussion about it. So if that's in the chat box, or if you want to mute your mic and do that, then feel free to store those up now. I appreciate you might be able to see the top of the screen there, so I'm going to give you the introduction just so if you can't see the title there. I'm going to talk about curriculum initially. So each of the slides we're going to talk about, Steve and I are going to talk about, will have a key quote from the report. So some of you will probably be reading that now. If you haven't, have a little look through that key quote, because I want to start by talking about curriculum and some of the kind of the pertinent points from that report that Ofsted noted around curriculum design especially. So on your left of your screen, you'll probably see quite a traditional model for the delivery of physical education in primary and probably in secondary school as well. If you take a sports-specific route to your delivery of physical education, this might be what it like. So you could put hockey at the top of that for a term plan. You could put netball, you could put football there, any forms of kind of traditional invasion game that might feature there. And it's interesting that Ofsted have noted that the average time spent on one of these topics or sports is around 5 hours across the course of an academic year. So you picture a term, you might lose 1 week at the front or the back end of a term. And the number of sports or physical activities that were introduced across that whole academic year was 10. But there's a challenge with this kind of traditional model that's often in place in schools across the UK, in that it's very difficult, having taught for 1 week, one term, week 1 passing, week 2 dribbling, shooting, tackling, and then perhaps ending with some kind of games, kind of celebration of that term of learning. It's very limited amount of time realistically to spend on one topic, on one area. And you might find that children are introduced to the skill of passing perhaps in, week 2 of September term, and don't revisit that again until maybe January in a completely different context, maybe in a hockey context or in a netball context. And that gap or that space between the learning is really vast. And for a child or a young person to retain the important learning from that event is really, 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 really tricky. So it's interesting that the Ofsted report has noted that traditional model there has caused issues in terms of children's knowledge, and they're being moved on possibly too quickly before it's been embedded. Steve, can you do the next one for me? Now, I've just screen grabbed here just a shot from a very traditional long-term plan. I found this one online yesterday when I was having a little look and preparing for today's webinar. This is quite a traditional long-term plan for physical education. So you've got different year groups on the side there. I just cropped off for size year 1 and reception. But you'll see that it's dominated and led by those traditional activities and sports. And it's interesting, again, when we look at the long-term planning of our curriculums, Ofsted have noted that in some schools, not all the schools, the 25 primaries and 25 secondary schools that were part of the study, that their curriculums lack their coherence because it started off, first of all, with context. It started off just with picking the activity and sport, not using the national curriculum as that kind of basis for the plan. So instead of starting off and thinking about what the children needed to learn and how our teaching was going to align to that, the starting point was, we need to put football in this term here, we need to put gymnastics in here, we need to put netball in here. And it's interesting, that was a theme that was found within the report. And also, if you go and search online now, if you went P long-term plan, I guarantee you'll find a lot of long-term plans that look like this, with very little information around the learning, but a lot of information around the context within which it's going to be taught, or the vehicle that is going to be used to teach that learning. So it's kind of flipped on its head a little bit. Actually, we should start considering in physical education the learning first and foremost, and then what vehicles suit that learning for the young people and the context I'm working with. And that links quite nicely to the next slide, where I've just kind of taken a screenshot or a grab of a year 1 example long-term plan from our scheme of learning, where you've got our the traditional autumn 1, autumn 2 that lots of long-term plans will have on there. But instead of considering just the vehicle that's going to be used to teach that content, we've got the national curriculum link front and center, so children are aware and teachers are aware of what they're going to be learning, what the focus is for that term, that unit. But also, we have that approach where we think of and consider 3 core things across a unit of learning. For example, in year 1, autumn 1, we're looking at agility, balance and coordination, those fundamentals of movement, nicely positioned at the beginning of the academic year. So thinking about what you'll need to embed at certain points in the year. And then we move through, and you'll notice that core elements of the national curriculum are revisited, and they're revisited regularly. So instead of there being a large gap from that traditional model that we looked at previously, we've got actually a model where children revisit those core elements of the national curriculum. So for example, autumn 1 and autumn 2, we're spending time on mastering basic movements, including throwing and catching. And we've got balance, agility and coordination and the fundamentals of movement. And then we look at summer 2, we're revisiting those again. So instead of building your curriculum around those experiences, actually what those pupils need to learn through those experiences is far more important. So instead of just thinking, right, let's have, and there was that phrase about curriculums being a mile wide and an inch thick from Ofsted recently. But instead of just thinking, right, what activities, what sports can we throw at our children, actually the review has noted again that the core learning and their fluency and their knowledge within those areas of physical education from our curriculum is far more important, so that they can then apply it to new contexts than simply throwing a variety of sports at the wall and seeing which ones we're going to look at and which one we're going to select. Steve, I'm going to hand over to you now. I think it was about 5 minutes. I'm going to hand over to you now for the next section.
You, Ben? Right, so yeah, it flows on nicely the next section around what pupils remember and can do. So once you've got your curriculum in place and some of the elements that Ben's talked about there, what were Ofsted reporting from the schools they visited, and also I suppose a prominent part of my job is visiting schools as well and working with subject leaders, head teachers, senior leadership teams to develop the provision in a school. And it's a lot of the messages that came from the report are very similar to what I would suggest I've seen. So if you think about the fact they've been in 25 schools, between us, we've probably been in 25 schools this half term alone. So we're constantly talking about what we see in schools and the good practice, the not so good practice, and everything in between. So a lot of the things that we're seeing are echoed by the report, and this is particularly one of them. So the quote on the right hand side there is alluding to fundamental movement skills and how they're not cemented well enough to allow children to be able to choose or select a pathway with regards to sports. So if we look at this pyramid on the left-hand side, which we use on our level 2 multi-skills course, but I think it's a really useful pyramid and diagram to use to illustrate the point. The bottom 2 layers are where if we do not have them bottom 2 layers and we haven't targeted this at an early age, and by just saying an early age, I mean full primary school age, arguably, particularly at my time in secondary and particularly in year 7 and 8, we still needed to refine them bottom 2 layers. But the facts are, without them bottom 2 layers in place and the depth of learning around it that Ben's just talked about there in terms of curriculum being planned to allow for them 2 layers to be focused on, worked on, cemented, have some depth of knowledge and understanding around, then we're setting up our pupils to fail. So we've all done it. We've all been in a lesson, let's take handball or netball, for example, where the pupils just keep dropping it. And we almost get frustrated and like, oh, why do they keep dropping it? Why do they keep dropping it? Why can't they play it? Well, they can't play it because we haven't developed them first 2 layers. And what we're seeing and what Ofsted are seeing as well is we're going into school and we're seeing year 3 play cricket, for example. And within that year 3 group of 30 pupils, perhaps 5-6 of them can actually strike an object the size of a cricket ball, whether it's a cricket ball or not. It could be a wind ball or a tennis ball or a smaller ball. 5 or 6 might be able to do it. There'll be schools and there'll be people listening to this saying, well, all mine can do that. But what we see in general is that they can't. So I'll give an example of a cricket lesson I went to at the end of last year. Year 3 cricket, which has probably formed this memory. The teacher, bear in mind we've been working with them as well, brought out a bag full of just cricket bats and wickets and a tub of tennis balls. And I literally said to him, are you sure? Are you sure you're going to go with that? And he said, yeah. I said, I know what you're going to say, but they're a really high ability group. And within that group, 5 could hit a ball that size. And then the second half of the lesson was dependent on them being able to hit it, because the second half was around catching. So they were supposed to be able to hit the ball without it bouncing, and the pupils could catch it. So the whole lesson fell down because they hadn't developed the fundamentals, movement skills or fundamentals of movement. They hadn't developed the hand-eye coordination to be able to strike an object yet. So they weren't using a range of equipment to promote that. They weren't using tennis rackets and dodge balls, anything, cones to hold balls on. The people dropping it in front of them, lots of different ways to increase the confidence of a child actually striking an object. That hadn't been done. So this is one issue that we really need to address, that we're not aiming for that second to top layer until we've developed the bottom 2 layers of that pyramid. And this sort of feeds on from what Ben's just talking about. I'm just going to touch on it a little bit more in terms of the curriculum design, and it relating to this quote on the right around how pupils were not secure and consistent in their knowledge and understanding of the subject. And it goes back to the curriculum design. And so this paint palette here is very similar to what Ben's showing you in terms of how it can look, how a unit of work could look, but just with a bit more detail behind that. The facts are, if this was a passing lesson in basketball, for example, and it was really well planned, and that means there was no cues, every child's got the ball, they might work in pairs, there's lots of repetition. Even if it was really well planned, the average is around 16 to 17 minutes they'll spend actually passing. Because at some point they'll probably go into a game, and that naturally reduces the repetition once they go into a game-related scenario. They're not going to be doing it as much as perhaps if we're doing a nice game where there's lots of passing and movement. The repetition is going to dip. So then after that 17 minutes, we're going to move on to that 17 minutes of contact. The next lesson, we're going to move on to dribbling. And the same thing will happen. Again, if it's a big if as well, it's really well planned. Every child's got an object. There's no cues again. There's lots of movement, lots of physical active learning time. If all them things happen, 17 minutes again. Now, the reality is nobody can master or fully understand a skill or anything within physical education in 17 minutes. And this is the tends to be ingrained approach. So what we need to do is spend a lot longer on an activity to allow for some depth of learning. So, for example, in our scheme, we've got a full unit on dribbling, we've got a full unit on attacking, a full unit on defending. So we're spending the whole half term revisiting, reviewing, learning elements that are new, just to really cement the learning so that this quote on the right-hand side isn't necessary, because the pupils do know what they're doing. They can talk about it, they can discuss it, and they can perform it and demonstrate it because they've had plenty of time to cement that learning and have that real depth of learning. So it's definitely something to consider around the curriculum design, but also if we want pupils to have that depth of learning, how are we going to allow that to happen? And that means that we have to revisit and review constantly, not just once a year. And one example, someone said this to me the other week in a webinar, sorry, a seminar, said around if you practice football passing and you did it with the side of your foot, the reality is you won't do that again for another year, unless you're doing some sort of not within physical education, unless you're doing some sort of spiral curriculum where you might revisit football a couple of times in a year. Now, if you compare that to maths or English, it's absolutely insane. If you think about it in that context, you would not do an element of the times tables in September and then leave it for a year and come back to it in year 4 or year 5. You just wouldn't do it. So we have to make sure we're not doing that in PE as well. And then this was a positive of the report. I thought it was worth highlighting because obviously, as you can tell by the name of our organisation, PE is not just around the physical elements. And it was good to see that OFSTED were reporting that pupils confidently discuss the social and mental health benefits around physical activity and PE. And that's a real positive and something almost a bit surprising that was the case, but a real positive that everything we do, we're communicating with the children to ensure that that's not just about them being able to do. It's not just a physical element. So if you look at our learning journey here, the blue are physical, the orange is psychological, and the green are social. The pupils have to know that. The pupils have to know that if they can think about where players should be positioned and understand that and talk about it, it's just as important within physical education as being able to strike the ball with a range of equipment. They need to know that they're successful within that lesson by any of these elements, that they've been successful, not just being able to do. And that's really important. So I thought I'd just highlight that positive around the fact that pupils seem to be speaking confidently around that, which I think is fantastic. I'll hand over to Ben for the next section.
Thanks, Steve. We're going to move on next section. I'm aware we've got about 20 minutes left, so this might be Steve and I's next section will be a little bit shorter to allow us time to chat with Seth and Julie. We'll talk a bit about pedagogy and assessment now, which is another part of the report. So the information at the top is from the EEF, or the Education Endowment Foundation. Steve kind of mentioned it. You wouldn't move on in with a phonics lesson. You wouldn't introduce one sound and never teach it again for the rest of the academic year if you were teaching in EYFS or Key Stage 1. You just wouldn't do that. And a lot of the approaches we use within traditional lessons in the classroom-based lessons, core subjects, foundation subjects, will have their kind of basis in a mastery-based approach where you revisit content and we move children on when they're confident and competent with that knowledge. And there's some of those issues are happening around physical education where we're moving children through too quickly, and our assessment of them is kind of based on assumptions. And you can see from the quote there, in some schools, teaching was based on assumptions about what pupils have been taught rather than what they've demonstrated they had learned. So that issue there of children not being able to show their declarative or procedural knowledge within a PE context, and there wasn't opportunity or time for staff to assess that before they moved on. And then we're moving them into a context which is too complex for them. And Steve gave that example of children moving on to play perhaps football or a traditional game where actually the movement isn't competent enough to take part successfully within that. So it's interesting that kind of approach to mastery that's been well researched and is an approach that's gathering, used regularly within the primary classroom and other subjects is perhaps something that could be considered in a PE context as well, where we're not rushing through content, but actually we're taking time for children to master things before we can move through, and linking our assessment to that so that we're not just making these assumptions like they've done that in year 1, so they'll be fine, they'll be able to do it in year 2, I can move them onto this. Actually, let's assess where they're at currently before we make those decisions. Thanks, Steve. There we go. Lovely. An interesting point that Paul will probably come in on and chat about this. It was also noted around Pedagogy's assessment was the notion of competition. Obviously, competition is part of the national curriculum. It's something that should be taught. But it's interesting that was noted in the report that those children, when competition was used, it often lacked a clear purpose, and it was just introduced because it's kind of the norm, and we do that traditional model. Maybe week 5, week 6, week 7, we introduce a game or a competitive element to it, and that default that PE always needs to be competitive, and that's always the default to it, that we don't kind of question or challenge anyway. So then we got those issues with those children that perhaps have struggled to complete those tasks associated with competition and associated with the activity, can't then fully participate in the game, the bigger version of the activity, because they haven't embedded those fundamentals, those key movement skills that will allow them to take part in it in a physical context. And then you've got issues with disengagement. And what we don't want to do is we want PE to be an inspiring environment where children are inspired to move beyond the classroom, beyond the four walls of the school and the boundaries of the school. We want them to be flourishing movers, not those that have been put off movement because they've had a negative experience in PE. And then finally, Steve, my last slide on pedagogy and assessment is around and Steve sort of talked about this in terms of holistic development. And we have a clear approach to that. We want to kind of assess children's knowledge when they're in the physical domain, the affective domain, the cognitive domain. You can see move, solve, connect there. And actually, if we haven't introduced these concepts to children, if we haven't taught physical education in a holistic context, how then can we expect children to solve those problems, to think creatively? If you think about a dance or a gymnastics context, how can we challenge them to think creatively if we haven't embedded those skills and given children the opportunity to take leadership of tasks, to work together as a team, to share ideas about how they might improve or what they might change the next time they come across a certain activity or a certain movement, how they can better and improve and evaluate their own movement themselves within lessons. So there's some really interesting points around pedagogy assessment that align really, really nicely to actually considering a movement away from those traditional models of physical education and thinking more holistically about the young people and putting the young people first in terms of our teaching and learning. Steve, I'll hand back to you for the last little bit before our discussion.
Thank you. So the school-wide system and policies, it was a very common theme, and I've just taken 3 quotes there around how the subject is approached with regards to auditing it, with regards to understanding of the provision, understanding of the quality of teaching across the subject. And as you can see, it said just over a third regularly reviewed the curriculum, rigorously, should I say. CPD is available to subject leaders, but often limited and irregular in how teaching, which we will all know, there'll be teachers on here who've had limited training in terms of whether it's on the SCIT or the PGCE. Some teachers we work with have had none. They've not had a minute's PE training, yet they've gone into a job in September and expected to deliver the curriculum effectively, and that's an issue. So the being able to access CPD and being able to audit the subject, so having that time out as a subject leader, which when we do these sort of things with subject leaders, we go in and they often have preconceptions around who the stronger teachers are, who the weaker teachers are, what classes might be an issue, what activities teachers are struggling with. But actually, when they go in and they spend a day with myself or one of my colleagues, and we just look at it and look at the subject, it can be quite shocking and revealing. And they may see some real good practice that they weren't expecting, and vice versa. They might see some teachers who need further CPD and further support. So it's a really important issue in terms of ensuring, first of all, how can you put anything in place for your staff in terms of CPD without understanding fully the state of the subject. So we have to have that rigorous and regular review of the curriculum to understand where the subject is, and then we can plan bespoke CPD for particular members of staff, not a blanket CPD session for all staff, but identify who needs what, and can we utilise strengths within our school to support that. I was going to show a video to support this, but I'm just conscious of time, so I think so. I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to hand over to Paul and our guest to be able to dig into this a little bit deeper and just have a little bit of a chat around some of the issues that have come out, some of the issues we've talked about, and give their thoughts on it. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Brilliant, Steve, Ben, thank you for that. If you wouldn't mind sort of just unsharing the screen, Steve, that'd be great. Just a reminder as well for everyone that's on call to make sure you're in the draw. To be in it, you've got to win it, the old saying. There's a link in the chat box just for you to subscribe for the free scheme of work trial, 14-day trial, no obligation. If you click on that and fill in the form, it takes you 30 seconds. You'll go into the hat at the end of this call. And for those, I didn't say this, but those who are current scheme of work subscribers, because I know there's plenty on the call that are, there's a separate form for you to fill in to enter the draw, which is now in the chat. Without further ado, that's correct. Let me share that. I'll share that in a second. So without further ado, just an opening gambit from the Ofsted report, really. So for many pupils, PE will be the first and often only place where they are taught safe, efficient and intelligent movement. That was all the opening sort of paragraph from the Ofsted report. So yeah, Julie, first of all, your sort of just really open question, your sort of take-home messages from what you've seen in the report and what you've heard this afternoon, really. And then Seth will come to you.
Okay, I actually really liked the idea about intelligent movement because it kind of links to what you've all just been chatting about. I've always believed that a good games, let's just go into games because it's a dominant area within a curriculum usually. A good games player isn't always the most skillful. A good games player is the person who can actually think and be creative. And often we see our curriculum just pushed into drill, drill, drill. And I was very privileged to be able to work in secondaries as well. And in the little project we've just been doing, there are people in year 10 who say, I'm still being told to dribble and pass, and they don't want to do that. They want to be those intelligent movers and those intelligent players. So I think that was a really, really important one. And it also builds in that broad and ambitious curriculum, because if we're doing year 1 to year 12 football, where have they progressed? I mean, literally, where have they progressed? And if you haven't already jumped on the bandwagon by the end of year 2, because you can't do those skills, you actually may as well just get off, because what we do is we plough through. So you're absolutely spot on with picking in that. And I do think the whole idea of looking at the idea of that communication and collaboration, which is in the national curriculum, it's a hidden agenda. We tend to get them to collaborate and talk every so often within maybe 2 minutes. Let's talk to your partner. What do you do? But actually, collaboration and communication is one of the high-level skills can be developed, and it's developed across your whole national curriculum. It isn't just PE specific. I'll stop there and let Seth jump in.
Yeah, brilliant, Julie. So from your perspective, Seth, and I'm particularly interested to sort of dive in a little bit around the SEND aspects of the report as well, around sort of, this was called leveling the playing field, wasn't it, the report? So read into that what you will. From your experience, Seth, what's your sort of, take homes? You're working in a lot of schools, doing a lot of projects, your sort of insight.
Yeah, I think, like I say, leveling the playing field being a key agenda, and it being about engaging absolutely everybody. And tends to be that teachers can obviously, to feel confident in their own teaching, can hone in on those that can do and those that are able. And I think that teaching, high quality teaching, whether it's PE or any subject, is about providing environments. And I think environments are provided by opportunity to differentiate independently. So I think if you've got pupils that can walk into a PE environment and they can, as an example, if they're intimidated by working in groups, of 3, 4, 5 children, and they want to work independently and dip the toe in the water and feel that they can at their own speed, that opportunity should be there rather than a forced, this is what we're all doing, this is what you have to do. The same in terms of leveling the playing field in regards to equipment. And I know that I talked to you about this last week, Paul, around a project that I'm doing in a school that I'm having a more extended period of work with, is to actually have differentiated bags of equipment. So across all the year groups, rather than saying, like was mentioned earlier, a cricket session with all cricket bats, I've got the bags labelled up with the theme from Beyond the Physical, and then within that bag there is, if it is an invasion games or striking and fielding unit, it's got a variety of different type of striking implements, a variety of different type of balls, so that it allows the lesson to be more accessible for the children, but also for the teacher as well, who's not confident, and is probably more of one of your dissenting voices around PE, that they're actually able to lay the equipment out and see how the children access it for themselves and be independent in that learning. I think that's the key aspect of leveling the playing field, is the child's ability and confidence to feel that they can feel their own way in.
Yeah, so I suppose that entry point in terms of, from a micro level, Seth, in terms of, I'll come to you in a second, Julie, in terms of the entry point into the lesson is quite important as well, isn't it? So often what we might see is like a one-size-fits-all approach. This is the activity, we've got 30 children, you're all accessing at the same starting point. I suppose, Julie, from like a subject leadership perspective, in terms of the complexities of each school as well, because each school is very different, how do subject leaders go about designing their curriculum so that it meets the, not only the needs of the pupils, but also the culture of the place, the geographical location they're in, the demographics in terms of the socioeconomic backgrounds? How would you sort of advise a subject leader to consider structuring their curriculum to level the playing field?
Well, yeah, that's one of my key thoughts as well. I do think the report is kind of hinting at whose choice is it for your content, who's making that decision making, because you get a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm really good at netball, therefore we're all going to do netball. I really like football, therefore we're going to do some more of that." So if you're going to do that in your situation, look around you. How many of your children are attending football? If it's an intentional act that you have chosen to go and push football, is it because so many people are accessing football, or is it because they can't, and therefore you're upskilling some of our children, giving them opportunities in their PE to be inspired by it? I always think that a lot of our choices is a historical one, and whilst we are all about child-centred, I'm actually considering that some of our curriculum is just old and stagnant and linked too far into our secondary school. So it's adult versions being watered down into children's worlds. So look wide, get some discussions, talk to the community, see what other people could link in with. And then you've got to then look at that content. Is it relevant for your children? Is it the right age groups to be looking towards? And then where's the sequencing of learning? Because they talked about active and engaged, to be actively engaged versus learning. What are the children learning that they take every time they step in and say, "I've learned something"? Because Ofsted's obviously going to be asking you about what are your children learning that they can know and do more and show. So make some choices that are actually your child, but also your school and community led. I know it's very wide, my answer, but I can't then go around saying, if we've never experienced hockey, but if you look at your community, none of your children are ever going to be able to get to a hockey club because actually it's quite an expensive place. Are we going to give them a tick box and say, there you go, that's a bit hockey? Or are we going to find something that actually can build up and move through with?
Yeah, some interesting points there. We are a couple of minutes off from doing the draw, so just a reminder, links are in the chat box. Don't miss out on having the opportunity to be in the draw. But Seth, just going to come to you in terms of, I just want to pick on something up in the report, really. So a quick quote from the report. PE is not without its complexities within each school. Schools that have a culture of championing PE and the complementary role of the wider extracurricular offer can help all pupils to be their best and can even rewrite pupils' futures in terms of their lifelong engagement with and enjoyment of sport and physical activity. I think it's quite a powerful paragraph, that. And Seth, you'll probably agree. Sometimes, you know, when I walk into a reception in school, you get a sense of what PE is about in that school, sort of subconsciously and consciously. Seth, from your experience of working in all the schools you have done, you know, how do we champion the subject on a day-to-day basis? What does the actual behaviours and the feel of a school look like in terms of championing the subject?
If you'd have asked me 20 years ago, my answer would have been very different. I used to go into a school in Leeds, and I won't mention them, but they were traditionally the winners of every competition, primary school, and they had trophy cabinets full, they had a reputation and everything, and there was a sense of competitiveness about the school. And to be fair to them, they didn't seem to leave people behind. They did seem to sort of be broadly across the school. As my opinions have evolved and my experiences have evolved, I think my opinion on that has evolved and changed. And now my view on it is leaving everybody to leave, hopefully, not just primary school, but secondary school with a lifelong love of being physically active. Now, Julie was mentioning, obviously, specific sports and things like that and where we make choices. And if we work backwards from what the priority isn't for children to go and play sport. The priority is for them to go and move their bodies in whatever way that looks like. So I think a celebration of children moving and a celebration of children, like Julie was saying, of collaborating and communicating and leading as well. Obviously, leadership is a big part of it. So that where, you know, that might look like a menu of those that want to play for the teams and go and compete against others. It might look like festivals and things that are celebrated where personal best is a priority. And it might be, you know, that sense of achievement through, you know, you think about motivating for children from one PE lesson to another. It's about success. It's not primarily, for me, it's not just about naming the skill and what skill have you improved, but have you felt left that lesson or left that activity feeling motivated by the confidence that you've built. And it's being built by the environment that you've been able to find your own way in with that bit of support. And I always think that when you're looking at any physical activity, and I used to be, again, through my own learning of my own errors and watching other people, used to be sort of quite coaching point led. And now I feel that through physical activity, it should be led by outcomes. And the feeling of something feeling right and being able to explore and being able to discover. And I think that then, as you were talking about, transcends across the feeling across an active school is one of, there isn't a right or wrong answer. And I think children struggle with that because in the classroom curriculum, they're used to ticks and, well, you're not allowed to use crosses, but whatever you did to define a wrong answer or an incorrect answer. Whereas in PE, if we can explore, there's no right or wrong answer. This is you sort of exploring your own sense of enthusiasm and intrinsic enjoyment of using your body. And nobody's going to tell you it's right or it's wrong. Go and explore it.
Can I just jump in, Seth? Because that is the whole heart of my understanding of our role, is to educate them through the physical, but it's not just through the physical. And everyone is born a unique, beautiful human being. And what we do is we put them in a massive big funnel and we shoot them back out to say, by the way, you're rubbish at this, this, and this, and this, because that's through content choice. That's through curriculum choice. It's also at what do we choose to assess people by? And actually, it should be by their communication skills, all the skills that life needs. I don't think I've thrown a javelin since I left secondary school. Oh, sorry, when I was old and I did like younger and I trained, but you know, some of those skills, are they relevant? And actually, I think it's a good time to actually jiggle around with some curriculum points. I know athletic skill model I'm involved with, they look at, you never look at one thing in isolation. To be able to catch a ball, there's a loads of things behind. It's tracking, it's communicating, it's, you know, hand-eye coordination, your footwork, your balance, everything's there. So yeah, I think it's a prime time for people to just get very excited and start making some changes for those unique, beautiful human beings who have a right to have movement and a love of movement in their lives.
Definitely.